While I was a graduate student, I did meditate. But life has gotten in the way to a certain extent, and now I have to say, I wake up each morning and I pray, which is a form of meditation or mindfulness. And the other closest I get to it, I think, is you can't imagine how many times I've been in somebody's head, and just yesterday, as a matter of fact, and said, "Dear God, work through these things," and when it's like being an athlete, you're in the zone and you can just kind of feel it happening. It's not true meditation. I think it's a little bit more outwardly directed because you're trying to do something for somebody rather than inwardly directed, which I think some of the mindfulness and meditation work is about. But perhaps you could talk about that difference, or.
Well, I'm as excited here to be and to have an opportunity to discuss with you some of the ideas. And as you mentioned, when I was young, I actually wanted to be a doctor. And how it started was that I grew up in a very large family. We had about 18 people in the family. And my grandmother, an old lady, she was the family head. And my father was a very well-known social worker, so he would bring all kind of medicine at home. And when he's away for his meetings and workshops, then it's the duty of my grandmother to give out the medicine. And it was a large village of over 600 households. And if anybody got sick, they would all come to my home. And when my father is away, the grandma sits there with the medicine bucket and gives the medicine to everyone. And as the family leader, she enjoyed that very much. But it got funny sometimes because she didn't know how to read. So somebody would come and complaining about headache, and she would give them the medicine for diarrhea. So at that time, I just started reading things, and I was very curious about these things. So she accepted me to be her student, or her assistant, and I would read out and say, oh, this medicine is for diarrhea, and this medicine is for that. So I enjoyed being actually the assistant of my grandmother, so-called family doctor. And I got the taste of being able to serve people. A few things became apparent to me. I saw very often, it was the same person coming again and again for one sickness or the other. And I started to wonder, why do we get sick? Like, why does it keep repeating? Is there a way to stop it? That was in my childhood. And later on, it didn't happen for many reasons. I had started a school that I had so much obligation to help. And nowadays, when I look back at it, I feel a sense of relief that I feel thankful that I didn't become a doctor. Also because I have seen the life of doctors in my community, how busy it is, how many obligations there are. And I think I had been kind of a little bit of radical, a bit of a rebel in a way. So I would have had a hard time to cope up with that. But what I would like to share quickly is that my journey to mindfulness, how I came to it. I was born in a Brahmin family and Hindu family. And it was quite an interesting experience. My father, he had 5 brothers. My father, he was a person of intellect and knowledge, and he was a follower of Vedantic movement in India, a very intellectual way of philosophical living. And my uncle, one of my uncles, he was the complete opposite of my father. He was a Hindu monk, a matted hair yogi, and wandering in the Himalayas, and then always smoking hashish and ganja. So I have never tried hashish in my life, but I always say I have inhaled probably more than anybody could think, just by sitting around with my uncle and in his company. And he was a wonderful person, a wonderful personality, such kind heart. And yet my father did not like him. My father stood all about responsibility and taking care of the family and the social responsibility. Whereas my uncle, my father saw him as an escapist, giving away family and all the responsibilities and wandering throughout the India and learning. And also because he wasn't very clean with all this matted hair. Imagine living in India in this hot climate. So he would come once a year to visit our family, and my father wouldn't allow them to come inside the house. There was a family mango garden, so they could camp in the garden. That's as close as they get there. He says, no, you and your brethren are not allowed inside the house. And I felt so so much pity for my poor uncle. He's such a wonderful personality. So I was kind of a tech kid. So I would take all the electric wires and give them a little light there and give them the bucket waters and thing. And then every evening, they would make a campfire, sit around the fire, and smoking, of course, hashish and puffing up all this air. And then they would share their stories, how they have wandered in the Himalayas. And I was so intrigued by their lifestyle, by their discovery. They seemed to know more about people, more about society than people in my family. So I kind of became very intrigued in their lifestyle. But it was quite a contrast because I had to judge myself and my ideas and weigh against the responsible way of my father, social responsibility in the family and everything, and try and see what my uncle represented. And I started reading a lot about philosophy, religion, spirituality, and in those days I remember I used to read a lot about Indian yogis, Vivekananda, Swami Yogananda and others, and even sometimes fancying that, oh, one day when I grow up I would like to become a yogi, go and live in the Himalayas. Never happened. But the closest thing I go and live in the Himalayas is I come to Canada for a few years a month. I live in the winter, and I feel sometimes like an oddball because I'm the only one who's enjoying all this Canadian winter in -30s. But then there was a time in my life when I began to question everything. When I was in about grade 10th, and I started reading all about science and reasoning, and I began to question my values. I came from Hindu religious concept where we have 34 million gods, so many ideas. And when I started to investigate all of that, a lot of my belief shattered. And I was kind of in a crisis, trying to understand. And at that time, I had been studying under my Buddhist teacher. She was trying to get me to become a monk. And I was a very hard child, very hard students he had. And I had asked her to agree with me to allow and ask her as many questions as I would like. So one of the questions I remember is that I said, can you prove there is something after death, if there is life after death? And in those days, I was so curious about ghosts. So I said, if you can show me a ghost, I will become the monk the very next day. She couldn't show me a ghost. And then I had heard all these stories growing up in the village. Oh, this place in India and Nepal, there is a place called charnel grounds where they cremate the bodies. And it's a very scary place, nobody wants to go. And I was told that if you go there in the middle of the night, you'll find the ghost there 100%. And nobody wants to figure that out, so nobody actually ever tries. But when I had that crisis, I said, I will try and figure this out. I have to find out for truth. So I remember I would get up around 11 o'clock in the night and try to sneak out of my house and try and walk to these places. And something very funny happened. I never met the ghost, but I discovered the ghost inside. I remember trying to walk to these places, and I'm still about 800 meters away from it. I can see it from distance. I haven't seen any ghost jumping or leaping or dancing there, as I was told. But I saw the fear. I realized that my breath had changed. I'm beginning to tremble for no reason. I haven't seen a ghost at all, and I'm trembling. And I saw the fear. And one day, I would come back. I would say, okay, this is enough for today. I will try next day. And eventually, I was able to go there and sit there and meditate. And I started wondering, I never saw the ghost, but I saw the fear. Why was the fear happening? Why my body wasn't listening to me, what I was saying? I became very intrigued about mind, about perception. And that was a great key for me to investigate about meditation. Because being born as a Hindu, I had different ideas about meditation. I was doing pranayamas, holding the breath. It was all about control. And then here I was offered the path of mindfulness, where it was not about the control, it was not about the mastery, it was just about simple presence, to understand your wildest fears, to understand how your mind works. So it has been an intriguing journey for me too. But I was also very curious to hear about the Western doctors here working through their medical knowledge and wisdom, trying to discover and talking about mindfulness and its benefit. For me, it's like a great source of wisdom. And I look forward to learn more about it, and I look forward to see what this will reveal for us in future. So I'm as intrigued here to be here, actually.
So the neuroscientist is supposed to come out now and say that what was happening was that his mesial prefrontal cortex was becoming intently focused, and it was stimulating his locus coeruleus and his nucleus accumbens, and it was auto-regulating his autonomic nervous system, such that his, so we can go through all of that. And that's the fascinating thing about where we are now in science with the what's called single photon emission computed tomography, functional MRI, tensor diffusion tractography. We can look at all of these different components of the central nervous system, and, even to the point now where we're putting in little microelectrodes and we're monitoring the extracellular environment on patients. We really have a much better grasp of what's going on with mindfulness. But just to, when he said that he doesn't have any regrets about not going into medicine, I have to admit that I do have regrets about maybe not having gone into the ministry, because, I love what I do. Don't get me wrong, and it's the only thing I'm good at. But it is a consuming passion, and I don't have a heck of a lot of time. And the reason for not having time, I was doing yoga last year, and just two things happened. Number one, I was so sore that I couldn't keep it up, but number two was just I just couldn't keep etching the time out in my schedule. But I've kind of done this about face, where we've come to similar places. How I fulfill my inner needs is doing work like taking work to Tanzania. We've set up a medical school. We set up a hospital there. And doing work like that, and that I find kind of the spiritual fulfillment that I need in life. I think that in regard to mindfulness, despite the fact that I am not a faithful devotee, where we are going with this in our practice of neurosurgery is, I had a patient 3 years ago now, who was a prominent individual here in Manhattan, in New York, actually all over, who had a life-altering experience. And that patient has now gotten back to life. And from the outside, you'd look at her and say, my God, she's beautiful, she's normal, yada, yada, yada. She's different. And it made me think about what I do. Whether in her situation was an emergency situation, but say you came to me with a benign brain tumor, it's not an emergency. And what am I doing to that patient that alters their life? And then, for me as a surgeon, I operate them, take it out, I see them take the stitches out and say, go God's way. We'll get an MRI scan once a year and everybody will be happy. But they still have to deal with their life. And the number of times that I've had patients come back and I notice that their significant other isn't there, and it's because they become divorced, because they're slightly different and their marriage relationship wasn't able to cope with that. So we've gotten back into the whole mindfulness thing, and Ken Perrine, who is going to be speaking to you at some other lecture, and I also have another neuropsychologist, Amanda Sachs. We're going to start working on what happens next after we've manipulated certain parts of your brain. The good part is I can now kind of predict what kind of dysfunction you might have. Ken Perrine is a smart guy and does all these 4 hours of neuropsychological testing. He can tell you what's not working exactly perfectly, but then we can try to bring you back to that fullness of life, which I think is so important, which is what I think we're about as physicians.
Very interesting. What I would like to add here is some of experiences I have had in my life where I kind of took mindfulness from my personal journey into using it as in the means of change in the social work we do. And one of the examples is that for the last couple of years, we have been running some community schools. I started a school a long time ago now with our friends in Lumbini, and we thought it would be a nice little school with maybe 50, 60 kids who didn't have the chance to go to school, and we're running it under mango trees and things. And then the idea came to kind of develop it, and so many parents came and said, we would like to see our kids educated, and we had quite a big school. And the first year we started, we had 160 kids. And within a few months, we reached 220 kids. And I was still very young. I had just come out of 10th grade. And there were a couple of things I didn't like when I was in this school, the way our teachers treated us, especially the use of corporal punishment and all those things. I said, well, we couldn't do much when we were in this school, but when we are building this school, this is our chance. We won't allow anything that we didn't like. It was kind of nice and poetic. So first thing I said, okay, there is no punishment. Nobody gets to bring any sticks. Teachers in Nepal, they love to bring a stick. They actually have their own personal stick that they fashion and make it nice and even sign it and bring it to school. So I said, okay, no schools and no sticks allowed in the school. But what I didn't realize was that how will we discipline the children without the sticks? Because it becomes a cultural thing. So after a week, my fellow teachers, they said it's just too difficult to control the kids. What do we do now? There is no sticks now, so what can we do? And I started wondering. I said, well, we'll try one thing. So what we did was the first time I gathered all the kids in our field, it's just grass and dirt, and we sat there and said, well, let's meditate. Let's just observe breath and do nothing. And we did 15 minutes of meditation. And so I taught our teachers that when they are a little bit very restless in the class and think, before you start your class, calm down for 5 minutes, just breathe. And it took us about 2 months. And we started noticing visible change. Our children actually started becoming calmer. It became easier to control them, easier to kind of get their attention to the teachers. And they naturally started being calmed down. And I never thought that it could be put in action and there could be a visible result. I would like to honestly tell you that it hasn't worked fully 100%. Not everybody is calm and like Buddha-like, all the kids. But most of them, it has helped. It has such tremendous change that it has convinced our team, my team of over 35 teachers now, that we can get away with the sticks. And it's possible to calm down the children, possible to reason with them, possible to generate that level of attention. And having seen that, it was transformative for me. Because before that, I thought it as my personal journey, that enlightenment, the meditation is for my personal quest. And having implemented in the school, I realized that it has a wider implication. Another small example I've just come across is just last year. Because when we started working with this school, I was so excited. I thought, well, we know how to read and write, and I know what to teach, and I had been part of nature clubs and doing all kind of things. I had some training, so I knew so many games. I thought, we know how to handle kids, it'll be fun. But when we started this school and we had about 200 kids gathering in one place, it was a disaster. Half of the kids didn't have their pants on. In Nepal, that's what happens. Like children until they're 5 years of age, it's okay for them to be at home and not wear pants. But when you come to school, it's a disaster. And also, the little ones, they hadn't washed their face. So it was just becoming too difficult. And I said, the first period of school is going to be about health and hygiene and cleaning and washing up. And then the male teachers tried. That's where I learned. The male teachers are not very good with the students, especially in helping cleaning and etc. But we realized that we can't do the parenting and the education part. And I started inviting the mothers to school to have a meeting with them to talk about different issues, starting with health and hygiene. And slowly I learned, when I started paying more attention on our kids, half of them were suffering from malnutrition and things. Quite a shocking thing for me, because Lumpini area is also the bread basket of the country. So many nutritious lentils and beans they produce, and yet so much malnourishment. So I started working with the mothers mostly. Last 4 years we have been working with the mothers, and with the help of them we've been changing a lot of things. But then I became kind of a little bit attached to the mothers. I started wondering about them, having known their life, what they do all their life, they're sacrificing. I always started worrying, what can we do to help the mothers? So I thought of other programs and have been doing. But about 6 months ago, what happened was that the mothers were just coming up for meetings and things, and they always ask, oh, is there anything else we could do? And we've been giving them vocational training, this training, awareness, tours around Nepal to learn and meet others. And I said, would you like to try meditation? It was just a very simple suggestion. And they were actually very interested. So we created a very unique program, and created kind of like a day of mindfulness. So every full moon day, they gather in Lumpini. So the mother said, we want to do something. So I said, okay, one full moon day, I'm totally free. We won't do anything. I won't be meeting with volunteers or the students. And the full moon day, the mothers gather there at 8 o'clock from the village. They walk there. And all day we do nothing. We just sit there. We have Dharma talks. We have storytellings. And we meditate. And I had them to meditate with us. And I said, this is what we do as monks. And we offer them one meal a day. And then they don't eat anything till the next day. And I try to help them to practice what monks do, what we do, trying to be calm and observing the breath, being aware of the body. And I did not expect anything from it. It's just a relaxing day. After about 4 full moon days, 4 days of such mindfulness day, we saw a great change. Like I could tell by the faces of the mothers, that it's becoming calm, it's becoming radiant, and they're more relaxed. And I asked, how is it? And they're bringing their friends now, and they say they love it. They say that even on the days of celebration, when they have finest clothes and good food to eat, they don't feel as happy and as good about themselves. The day when they just can stay quiet and meditate and just do walking meditation. And I realized another potential of mindfulness practice was that how, as a social worker's perspective, when I see my society say, oh, we need to do something to eradicate hunger. I need to do something about education, something about food, etc., economic system. But now I see that despite all of this, the greatest thing we can do to help someone to become happy, or even to ourselves what we can do to become happy, is also to become aware, to learn to be grounded in the present moment. And when having seen the transformation on the mother's face in their life, it changed my perception that meditation is more than, it doesn't belong only in the monasteries, it doesn't belong in the meditation cells and all, that it belongs to everyone. And so it's just a very recent experience, and I'm still looking forward to how it will go ahead. So in the meantime, I've been also becoming very, very interested to hear from the neuroscientists that what is really happening. What's the meditation and mindfulness doing?
Well, I think, that's the complexity that I think we in the Western civilizations face is, how can we incorporate a portion of the monastic life and have mindfulness present in our life, but then also go back and interact in New York, of all the most complex places to interact. I'm not originally from New York, I'm from the Midwest, so I always say I'm just a farmer trying to make it here in the Big Apple. This is a complex place to live. And in listening to you talk about the children that you were teaching, I have about 150 people in my group, and it's really herding cats. Neurosurgeons, by and large, tend to think of themselves as very high up on the food chain, and they have a very high self-impression. So managing them is exceedingly difficult. And what I'm hoping with this mindfulness approach is it will get, and listen, I need it the most, is to get us to take that moment to what I think is to evolve to the next level, which is one of peace, inner peace, which then will hopefully translate into outer peace. And that's so difficult. I mean, let's think, what are all the movies now that are going to win Academy Awards? Wolf of Wall Street. What's good in that movie about mindfulness, right? The American Hustle. I mean, they're great movies, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed watching them. But what in them is, we are being bombarded. All the advertisements during the Super Bowl. I mean, all the sports and the testosterone that's flowing. So I think that we somehow have to try to get a more mindful approach. Now, granted, I don't think the president of Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan is going to want all of their employees all of a sudden become mindful, because they might worry that they're going to lose that kind of vicious edge. But we've got to get there. And we know that it's good for us, okay? I mean, that for me is probably one of the biggest things that bothers me is, it's good for your heart rate. It's good for your immune system. It's good for your renal system. We know that it has anti-aging effects, okay? People have thicker cortices, increased white matter tracts. When we look at autopsy patients that have been meditators versus non-meditators, the neuron cell bodies, they're more abundant in the important nuclei. True scientists want to say it's soft science. There's very good science now that shows that it is good for us. And so I think it's good at the individual level, and it is my hope that somehow we can get this to transcend and become more effective at the social level. It'd be nice to walk down a street in New York and not hear a horn honk with a four-letter expletive coming out from behind the wheel.
Mm. Talking about New York, it reminded me that when I was here for the documentary actually, I don't know if I should let you know, but it was filmed in Central Park.
There was no noise. How did you do that?
And I remember, by the way, I love Central Park. And I always say to my Bodhi mom, my Canadian mother, that New York is my favorite city. And many people get puzzled. You're a monk, a man of forest and solitude, and you say New York is your favorite city. But I can't explain why. I just love the place, the vibrancy of it. Probably it's probably better, nicer in the summer. And first time I came here was summer. But just walking down the road, and I've seen people from all colors, people from all class. And it just seems a very global place, and there is a very special hum to it. And I remember that day, and they were filming the documentary, and I was sitting on the rock and meditating. It was a beautiful sight. And I think we were trying to make a 5-minute clip or something. And it took about 20 minutes, because there were helicopters flying on the top constantly. So whenever it comes, we had to stop. And as soon as we start, as soon as we are ready to say, okay, start, another helicopter comes. And sitting there on the rock and waiting, I realized, oh, how much mindfulness we need here. What a busy place it is. So for me to come for the premiere here is a wonderful union. What you said about the benefits of mindfulness. In Nepal, I have many roles. Apart from being monk, I am also part of the educators. Running a school, something I always think about, what is the role of educators? And more so, what is the role of education in life? And I had a very funny experience when I came to stay in Canada for a few months. First time, I had to go and write a driving test. It was a funny thing for a monk, because in my country, actually, my own traffic inspector in Lumini said, you just don't need to come there at all. You just send your application, we'll send you the driving license. And I said, what if I don't know how to drive? And he said, it doesn't matter. But when I came to Canada, and I asked my mother, Bodhima, do I really have to go down the center and write this exam? Can I take it at home? And she said, no, no, no. So I went there, and I must tell you, I failed the first time. I failed the exam, and I was so embarrassed. So I said, okay, I better study and do it nicely. And I started studying all the books about driving. And then it dawned to me, I became aware that what a nice society it is, that it's not just about your training, but it's also not endangering others' life. And I realized that a simple tool as driving in life, and it's just fairly easy, really. Just roads are very nice, and there are signs everywhere. If you just are mindful, you can do it, okay. That's why I think the Nepali government trusts the monks. And I thought, just for that, there is so much learning one needs. And then I realized that, what about life? What about life? The roads of life, we don't know. Sometimes we feel like we're going the right direction, it's heading north, and suddenly it turns around and goes to the south. And I realized that we learn all these skills, we learn language, we learn mathematics, we learn all these sciences, but we never learn about how to be a good person. But more so, not about personal justification to be a nice person, but the art of really connecting with other people, getting to know them, and really developing that. A big part of mindfulness is that many people view, I see, mindfulness as a source of personal transformation. But from the meditation perspective, from the Buddhist monastic perspective, we see is that there are two parts of mindfulness. One is to work with ourselves, to become calm, become centered, become balanced in the present moment, to develop a kind of sense of grounding, and then to open up to others, to generate a genuine empathy towards others, learn the art of connecting with other people. And I had been wondering what kind of education program we would develop in our schools. So far it has been me dropping in to tell stories. So my class there is telling stories and helping them to understand and talk to each other and be nice. Coming to the West, I realize that how important those are for the new world, for the emerging world, how significant those are. And I've been curious that maybe, hopefully someday we'll get to see a new kind of education system that also talks about mindfulness, talks about how to be a better person, uses those tools that has been employed by monks. And not, I would say, not necessarily only by Buddhist monks. In so many other traditions I find traces of same thing, mindfulness, awareness, getting to know yourself, and taken out of those monastic centers, put in daily life. I see monks in a way as labs, as a proof of someone devoting all their life to try and understand the benefit of meditation. And those are valuable resources of humanity, I see. Not everybody could become a monk. But some people they could dedicate. And hopefully all the knowledge we learn, and especially by the scientific community, their wisdom in it, their ways to find how it really benefits. I hope someday we'll be able to take it out of the context of religion and spirituality, or even the context of personal development, and realize how important it is to the human beings all, and be able to give it in the right context of education as a means of public education. That if we want our children to grow in the world and create a safer world, just like a driving exam, that there should be emphasis on the personal development based on mindfulness, on empathy. You would probably call me a dreamy. I see myself as well the same way. But that's what I hope. My greatest hope is that someday we'll arrive there. And when I hear about people from all aspects of life, I heard that there was a wonderful politician here in the US, someone who is trying to get mindfulness in the school. And I hear so many people from so many different walks of life trying to work on the same idea. I kind of hope someday we'll come to this stage where we can create a new kind of education.
Have you ever seen, as I think about it historically, for a while I was giving a lecture about God in the brain. Meaning that the hypothesis was that our brain is hardwired for God. People that have temporal lobe seizures will commonly have spiritual visitations. So I tend to think that there may be some component of neurochemistry that is involved with this. But the great concern I have is that we will always strive, but we'll never achieve. We're never going to get to that point where society, the majority of society, is mindful. There's just too many. There are too many children with coming from single families. The socioeconomic structure isn't favorable. The political structure around the world isn't favorable to allow it. I think that little microcosms exist. But I'm not hopeful that it's going to work in a mass population. And then I guess the other question is do you think that it's asking too much of the educational system? Whenever I hire residents and they come and they apply, at that point in their life they're 26 years old. And the first day that all the applicants come and I meet them, I say to them, I am not your parent, and I am not going to make up for the deficiencies that your parents had during the 7 years that you work for me. But this will be a happy marriage, okay? Or you won't be here. I don't know as though the educational system, it's almost asking too much of the educational system to say that, I'm going to mold your child for you. So somehow we really have to change the mentality of our society about the importance of parenting and how poorly many of us are educated in terms of becoming a parent. That actually probably should become part of our educational system, which is not. I remember back when I went to medical school, It was the beginning about training us for sexual sensitivity. You know, we would have to go and do sexual interviews on patients. So we've come a long way from that now. Now I think that we're going to have to start doing some mindfulness kind of training across the board. Do you ever see that happening?
The question of whether the mindfulness should come to school or not is still open to all of us. But I see the importance that the parenting and what a big difference that could make. And if we, as parents, if we could incorporate that into the way of raising our children based on harmony, based on groundedness, rather than about the fear of failing in future and trying to motivate them on that, I think that would definitely make big impact in future.
I think we're kind of approaching a time where we're supposed to open the floor to questions and answers. And I'll just make one comment before we do that. And I say, if you do start a hospital in Nepal, I'd be more than happy to help you do that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, I would say that it's probably been within the last 5 to 6 years that we've really been able, to use functional MRI and SPECT scanning to kind of corroborate some of the things that we've already felt. We've been able to do neuroanatomical tract tracing in animals, and certainly on autopsy patients, we could look at the weight of the cortex and the number of nuclei. In the scientific parlance, the psychological, psychiatric things are just kind of commonly referred to as a softer science. It's not meant to be insulting, but you can't hold it to the same exact level of measurement if I'm measuring a level of a neurotransmitter in a rat to the complexity that is involved in the number of places where an error could occur when you're doing formal neuropsychological testing. There's the patient's participation, the emotional level, cognitive abilities, as well as the vagaries in terms of interpretation of those particular neuropsychological tests. So it's now we're able to start doing, like I said, the tractography, where we can look at white matter tracts and we can see that in patients that meditate, they're bigger and they're thicker. We can actually map out what parts of the brains are being activated when when a person does Vipassana meditation versus, quote, mindfulness meditation. And even that, it's not every type of meditation activates the same area of the brain. So we're talking about neural networks, and this is why, this is an aside, I know Ronnie Reagan wants to say stem cells are going to cure everything. It is so complex. You are talking about a supercomputer highway that is going to be very, very difficult to, number one, treat, and number two, try to figure out.
That's something I'm really looking forward to see, the waves, where they go, how far they go. But what really touched me was that I was born in those villages, so I know people, and there is a sense of emotional attachment to them too, to a sense of trying to help. And I knew the limitations too. We try and do programs. Whenever we do programs at this school, we try and feed everyone, try and help them as much as we can. And also I know the suffering they go through. So I've been raised there, and I saw all the struggle they go through, and I said, there is only so much I can provide. We try and provide education for their children so they wouldn't have to worry too much about it. And yet knowing that on that day, on the mindfulness day, we do nothing. Just teach them how to be calm and balanced and then meditate. And just 4 or 5 programs like that. And I realized that even without having given them anything physically, somehow we were able to help them feel better, help them be calm and present. So that was very rewarding, very enriching for me, that sometimes by doing so little, how we can help them more. And one of the things I noticed was that the mothers, they started talking on their own about the meditation being taught at this school, that when children meditate for a bit, watch their breath, how good it is, how thankful they are their children are learning about it now. So that's one thing I have seen, and the rest I will still have to see. I can't say much.
How do you live without this thing now? I mean, my God, I mean, sitting at the dinner table with your children, and you have to, beat them to put the phone down so you can actually have a conversation. I'll be curious what, the impact that will have on our intellectual development. Whether we're going to see more ADD. Will our children be better at multitasking, or will they be worse at multitasking because they've got this device? That's another thing too that I didn't mention, is that presumably that meditation or mindfulness improves your ability to multitask, because it improves your ability to focus and then switch, and how to balance that focus. So I agree totally with what you're saying.
I have an issue with the multitasking.
It's good we have one issue.
Because I come across it a lot. And I see sometimes myself, I catch myself being a multitasker. And being a monk at the same time, being a social worker, and also a parent to so many kids, and taking care and educator, it just gets complicated sometimes. And I have given a lot of thinking to it. A lot of people, we often think that being multitasker is a bad thing. But what I have really learned from my personal experience is that the multitasking that you do without knowing, the multitasking that we do without knowing, that's the problem. But as long as we are aware about what we are doing, what is it we are doing, we're centered, and if we can focus our attention, let's say, on 3 things at the same time, it's okay. Very often what we realize is that we may think, I'm just writing this letter to someone, but at the same time we might be thinking about themselves, oh, how this person hurt me before, or we might be thinking about what will this letter do when they read about it. We might be imagining all. So unknowingly we start multitasking on so many things. Knowingly we're focusing on just letter writing, but unknowingly so many things start happening. So from the meditative perspective, what I know is that the energy that we put into processing information that we don't want to, that are not really our focus, but they happen in the background, that's more draining. So as you say, that sometimes when someone takes a moment of stillness, calm downs, one thing what we experience happens is that somehow the energy that is invested into thinking, the multitasking, unknowingly gets withdrawn. And there is a sense of centeredness, there's a sense of relief, sense of spaciousness, and we say, oh, now I can rethink, now I can focus. So I think what you say, it's a wonderful moment that sometimes we do need to withdraw for a bit. We need this stillness, we need this spaciousness to focus on things.
Yeah, the rituals I have is, the training that I had was brutal. I worked 120 hours a week, which has now changed, with all these rules and regulations, and I fear what's going to happen to medicine because of that, but that's a separate issue. But the training was incredibly intense. You just basically lived it. And then, then I think to a certain degree there's that personal desire to be really good, which Mom and Dad instilled as being immigrants in America. And then, what I do is, I don't have to do it as much anymore because I've done so much, but earlier on, every time I would do an operation, I would go through that operation just like a playbook about 15 times. So every step, and I would have contingency planning, like, the aneurysm blows at this point, what am I going to do? Blows at that point, what am I going to do? So that every step, I was always ready for the catastrophe, and I was very thankful when the catastrophe did not occur. And so that was, by the time I got to the operating room, then I knew exactly what I was going to do. Everything was put in the room the way I wanted, and I had everybody behaving the way I wanted them to behave, and it made it ritualistic, which, like in mindfulness, there's a ritual to it.
When it comes to the idea of meditation, I have come across so many views on it. But from the Buddhist perspective, or from a monastic perspective, how we understand meditation is, as a process. Actually, the word for meditation in the ancient Pali, in Indian language, is called, in Pali it was called samadhi. In Indian language it's called dhyana, or dhyana. What it means is mostly a state of witnessing, that you, rather than being active or reactive, that we often find ourselves, we are, either through thinking or acting on thoughts. So we either are acting on our thoughts as an actor, or we are reacting to situation, we are reacting to what is happening. But there is another state of being that is in the middle somewhere, that you become a witness, an observer, a very equanimous observer. You don't say this is good or bad or anything, very equanimous observer and observing reality as it is. And what we understand, that there is a sort of inherent wisdom in us, an inherent capacity to discern. That's what perhaps makes humans so unique. That when you are able to observe a situation without acting or reacting, you begin to see different dimensions of it. You begin to see other sides of it. You begin to see that there is a bit of a spaciousness in any situation where you don't need to react the only way you thought there was left to react. So that's what is called a state of meditation. But as Dr. Stieg here was telling, that to become a surgeon, how strongly he practiced. And I was reminded of my practice, because I used to think one time that, well, probably one of the things that happened me not becoming a doctor is that I didn't have to study so hard. But now I understand that it's almost like meditation, that we work so hard on the meditation, trying to train ourselves until it becomes natural. So it takes a lot of practice to develop that capacity to witness, to experience the moment as it is. So how I would define meditation is that in the Buddhist tradition there are different techniques of meditation, but they basically serve two purposes. First purpose is to be able to concentrate the thoughts, to be able to harmonize the thoughts, to be able to guide the thoughts. Many forms of meditation techniques are used for that. For example, the most common, the one we use, is watching the breath, trying to center ourselves on the breath, just the awareness of the breath. And it kind of harmonizes the thoughts, makes you centered, kind of releases you from all the multitasking that is happening unknowingly in the subconscious, let's say. I would say it's a convenience of language, because I have a neuroscientist sitting here. So in that moment, you become centered, you become balanced, and it kind of brings a calmness. The other step of meditation that we define is a bit more creative, that when you use the centered state of mind to develop the inherent skills again, like empathy about others, opening up yourself to think about others. And that process itself is very transformative. When you kind of shift your focus from your hurt and pain and think about others, we begin to see so many aspects that transform our experience. For example, when somebody has reacted really badly to us, been very grumpy at us and angry and shouted, let's say, and we felt very painful, but we take a moment, we step back and we meditate. We'll say, I'm very restless now, but let me calm down. We meditate on the breath. And after we feel we are calmed and centered, and we begin to generate empathy, think about others. Sometimes we may realize, oh, the poor fellow, she scolded me or abused me, was angry at me, because maybe she was disappointed about something. And then somebody may tell us that, oh, they're having a tough time at the family. And we'll begin to see that how it was not the best he or she was able to be. And it kind of helps you to understand the other strings behind it. And you can't help not generate compassion about it. You can't help but develop empathy about others. When I started studying about the Buddha first, he talks like psychologists. He talks about the different mental states. And a lot of things, if you study, you can identify, yeah, I have experienced being like this. I have been a person like this. And then he talks about there are 8 different stages of being. Some people call it 8 different stages of meditation and thing. And some people may think that the 8th one, the highest meditative state, might be the best one. Buddha says, no, 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 the 4th of them is very important. On the 4th stage, Buddha says that everything drops. The normal function, the cognitive function of mind, the thought, the supplication of thought, even the idea of joyful rapture drops. And there are only 2 stages left. Sukha and ekagrata, a kind of weightlessness, mentally being free from burdens. Burdens still will be in life, but we can train ourselves that we can put them aside for a while and just relax. Sukha, sense of spaciousness, and ekagrata. And the mind stays put, stays focused, stays almost like in Nepal we have wildflowers, and sometimes when they ripen, the seeds, they have fur in them, and then the wind comes, they fly. But they're so gentle. I remember as a kid, I could kind of put them on my hand. They would just barely touch it, so light. So Buddha says your thought becomes so light, so refined, that it just stays put, like a little feather. That stage, Buddha calls it the fourth stage of mental absorption. And he says the path of enlightenment goes from there. But the interesting thing, I haven't become enlightened yet, I haven't found the path yet, because I believe there is still so much joy in life, so much good to be done. So I kind of, a little bit, I should probably modern scientists would say a little bit of, I don't know, distracted mind. But what I understand is that there is no separation. It's so much good to be able to help and do the work we do. But what happens is, the way I see it, that once one can reach that stage, there is no conflict in the mind. All the inner conflict, it kind of becomes meaningless. The reason we carry on all this emotional burden is because we think there must be a meaning in it. There must be something that justifies us. But when you are ready to drop and the mind stays just balanced and focused, I think that's already a state of enlightenment. That's already a state free from any kind of conflicting thoughts. So that's all I can add to the...
I think you should have him on stage with Woody Allen. Could you imagine the change?